Buckeyes Now on Sports Illustrated. I'm Brendan Gulick, and welcome to Week 2 of the NCAA21 simulated Ohio State Buckeyes season. Virtual season got off to a scary start, but a good one last week. Buckeyes eked out a win in Champaign, 27-24. It was anything but comfortable, but a win's a win, and it was a good start to the season for the Buckeyes. And now they get to come home and play a Rutgers team that, frankly, isn't very good. They haven't been very good for a while. And perhaps this is the week that Ohio State can maybe look more like the team that Buckeye fans have been used to. As we preview the game, let's tell you a little bit first about Rutgers, and then we'll go back to the Buckeyes. So obviously Rutgers is now back under the leadership of Greg Schiano, his second tenure in Piscataway. He spent 11 years there from 2001 to 2011 and had a pretty good run, 68-67, but of course was playing in the Big East. Certainly much different competition than what you'd see in the Big Ten. So he's back there now, and unfortunately, he's one of the new head coaches that got snake bitten by the pandemic. They did not have any spring practices. So Rutgers comes into a game here virtually for us, and on top of the fact that they're not a particularly good team, they also had no spring ball to try and work through some of the things that a new coaching staff would want to put in place. So it's certainly not a promising start for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Some interesting notes on them. They have lost 21 consecutive Big Ten games in real life. 21 in a row. It's the second longest losing streak all time in Big Ten history. Only Northwestern in 1978 to 1982 lost more consecutive league games when they dropped 38 in a row. So this certainly is not a good stretch for the Rutgers program. In fact, their last win came against Maryland in 2017. That was their last Big Ten victory. Rutgers last year lost by an average of 33 points per game in league play. The average score was 39-6, and they were outgained by 241 yards per game. So they really, on top of the scoreboard, they weren't even close statistically, and that was a huge problem for them and certainly led to a coaching change. But the good news for them is they've got a bunch of starters back, and so maybe that can help things a little bit. 8 on the offensive side, 8 on the defensive side, so 16 overall. But it's going to take some time before Rutgers really gets to where they want to go. And Greg Schiano is, as Buckeye fans are certainly aware, he is not shy about setting high expectations out in New Jersey. Perhaps one thing they do have going for them, they do have a transfer quarterback from Nebraska, Noah Vedral, who's supposed to be a reasonably good quarterback. I imagine it's going to take him some time to get used to things, but maybe that could be a bright spot for the Scarlet Knights. And they've also actually got Ohio State transfer at free safety, Brendan White. So they do have a Buckeye, or I should say a former Buckeye on their roster. Maybe he can help them out a bit defensively. Offensively, this was a statistic that kind of stood out to me. Rutgers, the last 4 years, and again, these are real-life numbers, even though we're simulating the season. The last 4 years, Rutgers has averaged 38.3 points per game against non-Power 5 teams. In the last 40 Power 5 games they've played over the last 5 years, they have scored an average of 10.5 points per game in 40 games against Power 5 teams. They have totally been overwhelmed by Power 5 competition. So, as you'd expect, this certainly is a game where the Buckeyes are going to have the upper hand. How about the 6 scores all-time between Ohio State and Rutgers? If you haven't remembered these or you don't remember them off the top of your head, they are ugly. Working backwards, last year the Buckeyes with a 56-21 win. In 2018, it was 52-3, 56-0, 58-0, 49-7, and when Rutgers joined the league in 2014, the final score was 56-17. So Ohio State has had Rutgers' number in a huge way over the years. I would imagine that in week 2 of our virtual season, it'll probably be a little less close than what we saw last week with Illinois. All right, so back to the virtual idea here. The Buckeyes coming off a 27-24 win over the Fighting Illini in a game that was much closer than they would have expected. Took a late Blake Haubeil field goal in order to win. A couple things that stood out. Chris Olave, top wide receiver, one of the top receivers in the conference, was not even targeted in last week's virtual win. Have to think that he's probably going to be at least a little bit more involved this week. One of the guys that was targeted for a couple catches last week, young receiver Julian Fleming, one of the top recruits in the country, no matter what recruiting service you're looking at. He had 2 catches last week, but I would imagine that, especially in a game, if Ohio State can get out front of Rutgers, maybe this is a week that Fleming could burst onto the scene. And let's talk a bit about the running game, right? Trey Sermon last week in our virtual game, he was targeted on a lot of screen passes. I would think, even though Rutgers has 8 returning defensive linemen, that this could be a game where the Buckeyes get the rushing attack moving in the right direction. You try to think a little bit bigger picture here. This Ohio State team has been so good in real life the last decade, and has a lot to do with their ability to run the football and control the clock. 6 of the last 7 years, they've had J.K. Dobbins and Ezekiel Elliott, who are 2 of the top 3 running backs in school history, right? So moving on from the J.K. Dobbins era, you've got a guy that transfers in as a graduate student from Oklahoma. A lot of talk about Trey Sermon. Master Teague in real life probably wasn't going to be able to play most of, if not all of the season with an injury. So Trey Sermon was going to get a lot of touches. I would imagine in our virtual week here that against a Rutgers team that isn't particularly good defensively, this could be a week where Sermon maybe gets things rolling. Yeah, I mean, again, Dobbins and Ezekiel Elliott, 2 of the top 3 running backs Ohio State's ever had. Most ways you slice it. Pretty impressive what they had done. And so big spotlight now on Trey Sermon. We'll see if he can get it going here in week 2. So there's your little preview. You can read the rest of what Adam Prescott has to say below as we get you ready for our virtual week 2 in NCAA21. A reminder, the game will quote-unquote kick off at noon. It'll be available on our website starting at noon Eastern on Saturday. The link will go live at 8:30 a.m., and then we'll update the page just as we did last week so that you'll have the game live there. We'll tweet some highlights throughout the course of the game, so in case you're missing it along the way, you can catch it a little bit on social media. But be sure to come back after the game's over, because we will post full highlights and have a really cool highlight package for you. It looks a lot like what you'd see if you were watching a game on ESPN or if you'd see a highlight package on SportsCenter. It's pretty cool. So come check that out after the game is over. It should be up probably around 1:15, 1:30, something in that ballpark. And then we'll have a reaction piece right around 7 o'clock that night where we can talk a little bit more about the game and have some more fun. So hope you enjoy week 2. It's the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Rutgers Scarlet Knights right here on Buckeyes Now.